We were going to go do training. I was at Station 1. We were looking for a fugitive, actually on Tinker Air Force Base. It's about 7 linear miles from here.
I had taken off because my wife was the attorney at that time for the police department. Well, she had a lawsuit going where she was defending some officers at the federal courthouse. And I looked at my watch and it was 9:01. And I thought, boy, the reason that stuck out in my mind is I thought I'd really better get in there. I'm going to miss them start the trial.
There was a grocery store at the corner at 13th, Northwest 13th and Broadway, and we were actually standing there when the bomb went off.
I had just sat down on the bench when...
There are 4 elements that I have to receive information regarding.
That's when I felt it rock. We felt it more so than heard it.
It looked like a nuclear bomb, a fireball, going hundreds of feet into the sky.
We turned on a TV, helicopter was panning around, and when they got to the front of the building, as a bomb tech, I knew immediately what that was.
I remember looking around and there were no windows, and the sound of the car alarms was almost deafening. Every car alarm in downtown Oklahoma City was going off.
The debris in the roadway, trees down, glass, cars on fire. It looked something like out of a movie.
There was cars on top of cars and still fires and the smells. I'll never forget the smells of that day.
One of the first things I saw pieces of paper floating in the air still. I mean, they were just flying everywhere.
There was dust and debris just floating through the air at that time, just a little bit of sunlight filtering through, and people started walking out.
The doors to the old YMCA flew open and had lots of children there and workers, and everybody came out and almost everybody was bleeding.
There was 2 officers who at that time had been on for a little bit and I looked up to, and they started walking down the street and they're covered in blood. And I ran over to them to try to get them to the triage area. And they both just looked at me and they're like, this isn't ours.
I made my way to the front of the building. There were no wounded there. We found no one alive.
They were scrambling pretty frantically, and I realized what they were doing. They were uncovering children.
One of the bomb techs behind me, I don't remember which one it was, grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me back, and there was a large chunk of concrete that fell about that time and fell right in front of us, and it fell on the location where the noise was coming from. And there was no noise after that.
We were just moving piles with 5-gallon buckets, and we come across a desk and had a picture of a lady and her young son, and I had about a 5-6-month-old son at home at the time. And so I saw the picture and it kind of hit me, because there's all this debris around it. So we ended up moving the desk, and under the desk, the lady that was in the picture was there.
You hear the term blown to pieces a lot when you hear people talk about an explosion. But I had never really seen it with people. I mean, there were people that were literally blown to pieces. There were pieces of people inside that building.
In the street! Get away from the building! Up to the street! Happen. They think there's another bomb.
The radio announcement came out that there was a second bomb threat or bomb scare, and everybody to exit the building. And we just kind of looked at each other and decided we're just going to keep digging for this lady, which is one of the dumbest things I've ever done in my life. I had a young wife and a 6-month child at home.
Let's go! 3 blocks, let's go! Come on, man, let's go!
The people ran and the bomb tech stood on the corner because we knew we were going to have to go look, see what it was.
I was very new on the department. I was very young, and I remember I was like, oh my gosh, this has happened, and now there's going to be a second one, and we're supposed to stay. And that's exactly what we did.
We're going to be gone for just a few minutes. We're going to come back with the tools and equipment and get you out. About the time I went outside, my officer at Station 1 at the time was really adamant and insistent that I was not going to go back in, which was really tough to take because we had promised this lady that we were going to go back in and help her out.
I spent most of that first day trying to find the survivors. We found some. We didn't find a lot. We found some. We found several that didn't make it.
It was really hard to accept that somebody would come in to our city and intentionally do this.
"168 people lost their lives in the Murrah Federal Building bombing. We see their pictures inside the museum and their chairs out here on the memorial site. It's where we bring you this Fox 25 special tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Snyder.
And I'm Wendy Suarez. More than 600 people made it out of the rubble alive that day, April 19th, 1995. Survivors like credit union employee Amy Downs tell me they're feeling an extra weight as we approach this 25th anniversary. We're in the midst of yet another crisis, the coronavirus pandemic, and those familiar feelings of change, uncertainty, and grief are amplified.
1 minute, life was normal. And the next minute, it was changed forever.
Life forever changed by what started as an incredible roaring sound the morning of April 19th.
Everything went black, and I remember feeling this rushing sensation like I was falling. And I was falling 3 floors.
Amy Downs, or Amy Petty as she was known back then, was buried alive under 10 feet of rubble of the Federal Building.
I can't see anything. Like I could open my eyes or close my eyes and it didn't make any difference. Everything was black. I couldn't move, and it was very hot, and it was very hard to breathe. And
You thought you were gonna die?
I did. I did think I was gonna die.
Trapped and crying out for help for around 45 minutes, she heard the voices of rescue crews, but that lifeline was quickly taken away.
I'm thinking they're getting ready to grab my hand, pull me out.
Get a strike! Get away from the building!
And about this time, they all started yelling, "There's another bomb, we have to go."
What happened? They think there's another bomb.
Alone, again in the darkness, Downs started pleading with God. At 28 years old, she was 355 pounds. She had flunked out of college, and now she wanted a do-over.
I just had regret for that I hadn't really ever lived my life.
6.5 hours later, she was being loaded onto a gurney. Her body was pierced with glass and her leg nearly torn off. Downs made it, but of the 33 employees inside the Allegiance Credit Union that day, 18 were killed. Their names are now inscribed on a memorial at the new credit union.
How do you grieve that many people? And we were a really close office group, and I still miss them.
Downs is now the CEO of the credit union where she started as a teller, never forgetting the promises she made on April 19th to live her life with intention and never take anything for granted.
Hope is a verb. My journey of impossible transformation. Written and narrated by me, Amy Downs.
And now she can call herself a published author. Her new book encourages others they too can make it out of adversity transformed, a message particularly relevant in today's uncertain times.
Right now, we can't control everything that happens to us, but we can always choose our response. Hope is within you, and it's the action and the path you take that's important.
Her journey didn't happen overnight, but what's never changed is the feeling as Downs took her first breath of fresh air out from under the rubble.
My favorite flower rises high in the center of my garden.
A passage in her book reflects on her Sonia sunflowers. Sonia, also the name of her dear friend killed in the bombing.
Basking and thriving in the fierce heat, as if to praise the fire that burns. And that's the thing. Life takes us all in really difficult directions sometimes, but we're gonna get through this.
Downs is literally giving away hope. She is donating 100 copies of her new book, Hope is a Verb. They'll be passed out curbside tomorrow outside of Commonplace Bookstore.
As first responders were still pulling people like Downs from the rubble, investigators were already looking for the person behind the attack. FBI Special Agent Barry Black takes us through a nationwide search for a man sitting in a jail cell 60 miles away.
It was the loudest explosion I've ever heard. There was a boom and the ceiling fell in and the building shook and the walls crashed in and I covered my head up.
It was incredibly loud. I looked to the west and could see big pall of black smoke already starting to blow across downtown Oklahoma City.
Barry Black was 7 miles from Oklahoma City at 9:02 a.m. on April 19, 1995. But even seeing the smoke rise over the skyline, he had no idea what he was getting into.
Immediately, we didn't know exactly what had happened. We were getting information when I was en route that it may have been a plane crash or a gas main explosion. So we had to get a handle on what may have occurred.
This is the Murrah building. This is the building we're in. That's my car.
Wow. On scene, Black, a first-year bomb tech at the time, was trying to sort through the chaos. But like many other Oklahomans that day, his mind was on his loved ones.
My wife was a federal probation officer, so I didn't know where she was.
The walls are real weak. Anybody that's close to these buildings are in danger.
Black later found out she had driven out of the building just 2 minutes before the bomb went off. His full focus shifted into finding out exactly what went on here, and he had a massive area of evidence to sift through.
The rear latch of the truck weighs about 5 pounds. We recovered it on the 8th floor of the Regency Tower.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a tremendous blast.
But the big break came when teams found the rear axle of the now infamous Ryder truck. It gave investigators plenty of clues, but most importantly, the unique CID that led teams to Ford Motor Company. Ford traced the CID to Ryder Rental Company, Ryder Rental to Elliott's Body Shop in Junction City, Kansas, and ultimately to 2 sketches almost every Oklahoman knows.
We were able to publish those, and we generated thousands of leads as to who those 2 people may be. The common name that came up was Timothy McVeigh.
McVeigh's name was also used to rent a room at the Dreamland Motel in Junction City. On the night of April 20th, investigators did a nationwide search to see if any officer had come into contact with their new prime suspect.
We found that Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper had arrested McVeigh the morning of the bombing. He was still in jail.
By some miracle, the man police were searching the nation for was stopped just miles up the road. Agent Black flew to Perry, seized the getaway car, and took McVeigh into custody. For Black, who was at both Waco and Ground Zero in New York City, Oklahoma City will always stand out to him.
What made this unique for me was how close my wife came to being a victim. The people we knew that did not survive the blast, maybe not more or less tragic than 9/11. I just knew the people here.
The investigation following the bombing is often considered the most successful in the history of the FBI, ending with the convictions of McVeigh and Nichols. It's incredible when you think of the size and scope of it, and that they had no office to work from starting out. There was also the added challenge of making sure every responding agency had a meaningful role. We sat down with former special agent in charge of the FBI, Bob Ricks.
It's almost incredible to me that 25 years has passed.
Before there was Oklahoma City,
I can still see faces and people and times and even smells.
there was Waco, Texas. And Bob Ricks saw firsthand the mistakes authorities made in handling a 51-day standoff at a religious compound. It came to a tragic end April 19, 1993. Exactly 2 years later, Ricks got a call while at a charity golf tournament in Shawnee. He was simply told there'd been a bombing at the federal building.
I had investigated numerous bombings in the past, and most times you're talking about a pipe bomb that takes a chunk out of the building, and you may or may not get people injured.
He was speaking with one of his agents while heading back to the city when he made an important connection.
And he said, Bob, he said, do you remember what today is? And I said, what do you mean? He said, today is April 19th. And almost immediately, I was pretty convinced that it had something to do with Waco.
And when did you realize this wasn't just some little pipe bomb?
I did not realize the enormity of what had transpired until I got there. My initial thoughts were, we're going to have a catastrophe here that the United States has never seen.
Ricks found himself in charge of not just the investigation, but also the rescue and recovery. That was the FBI's responsibility at the time. He immediately let Oklahoma City police and fire chiefs know that he would help them, but he would not interfere.
I have to work with the police and the fire to make sure that we're all integrated. Then you have the other competing interests that are there, from the Secret Service to the ATF to tax people. We even had military people.
Ricks had to assemble a team of investigators and immediately create a field office from the ground up, something that usually takes months. Was that the biggest challenge at that point for you, was kind of getting the logistics and setting up that office, or what was the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge is not only is the rescue operation going on, but we now have a worldwide investigation going. Some reporters doubted, did we have the capability of handling this at our level, even though we're just a small hick town, as some try to portray us, which we're not by any stretch.
That investigation was massive. By the time it was over, the Bureau had conducted more than 28,000 interviews, followed some 43,000 investigative leads, amassed 3.5 tons of evidence, and reviewed nearly 1 billion pieces of information. In the end, the government that Timothy McVeigh hated and hoped to topple swiftly captured him and convincingly convicted both him and his co-conspirators.
I have no doubt that we were able to capture and prosecute, or at least work through the criminal justice system, all the principles that were involved.
Ricks delivering on a promise he made to seek justice.
This was probably the FBI's finest hour.
But he also achieved his other goal of having all agencies and the entire community working in cooperation.
We all came together, we all bonded together, and we all had common and mutual goals that we wanted to see this succeed, and that's one reason that we were so successful.
Now, 25 years later, the memories aren't something Ricks always welcomes.
Sometimes when I walk away from it for a while, I don't want to even think about it.
But his desire to share the successes and lessons of the Oklahoma City bombing is much stronger.
Who in the world would have thought such an event would have happened in Oklahoma City, which means if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere.
The unthinkable can become reality in an instant. And Oklahomans, Rick says, should be proud of what we've accomplished 25 years later and always. For the first 10 years of the Memorial Museum, there was no mention of the FBI or the investigation. That has since changed to include an extensive exhibit. By the way, the FBI still has agents working on this case today.
The bombing didn't just change how the FBI investigates, but how local first responders prepare and react. Oklahoma City's current fire chief, Richard Kelly, took hard lessons learned from April 19th and helped create our urban search and rescue team.
Out of the tragedy, we were able to do a lot to provide for our city, and we've actually been able to expand that and provide at a state and a national level. We've done a lot of things in the city, but we also went to Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Florence.
Kelly says he was able to learn from the USR teams that came from across the country to help in Oklahoma City. It took nearly a decade to get everything up and running, but now Oklahoma City is ready to return the favor wherever disaster strikes. The museum behind me here is filled with countless dedications to the victims and heroes of the bombing. But it's one outside the museum walls, or rather on it, that no one thought would be there days after it was placed. And it has stood the test of time. We search for the truth. We seek justice. The courts require it. The victims cry for it. And God demands it. 21 words drawn in spray paint on the side of a condemned building form one of the most powerful messages from the Oklahoma City bombing.
I never thought it'd be up there 25 years later. Never in my wildest dreams.
Rocky Yardley is the artist behind maybe the most revered piece of graffiti in the state, calling it an homage not only to the victims, but also the men he worked beside for 26 days on Team 5.
I mean, my heroes were the guys I worked with every day down there.
Team 5 was officially formed the morning after the bombing. The group of bomb techs from around the state had the tall task of piecing together evidence from one of the most damaged areas of the bombing.
We had the north side of the parking lot, the front of the building. We did the sifting on site of all the evidence that came out of the building. We were a pretty busy group.
And he gave us all a can of orange spray paint and told us to start finding and painting a large orange circle around each piece of what we can find.
The group worked countless hours, refusing to stop until their job was done.
Billy Graham and President Clinton are going to be down at the fairgrounds for Memorial. We're going to take a break. And we all looked at each other, we got people in there. You know, we know people that are in there, federal agents that we knew and worked with. We're not going to take a break.
And then the news came.
We were down there still looking through cars, still sifting through the things, and there was a FBI agent that came up and said, "We got it. At least we are going to get some justice." And then, you know, Rocky comes up with our saying for the side of the
Yeah.
They were going to tear the Journal Record building down. That was the original thought. I had no idea, so I asked if I could spray paint it, and they said, yeah, we're going to do away with the building.
And so Rocky painted 5 sentences as the words just flowed through him.
God, I think, spoke to me and said, here you go. All I did was write it.
Now every year, Team 5 returns to the memorial to repaint the historic quote. But Rocky has just one minor regret.
I wish I'd have written nicer. My penmanship was a little bit better.
One more very interesting thing about Rocky Yardley, while he gave Oklahoma one of its most memorable memorials, he also admits he almost took one away. Rocky was just seconds away from taking a chainsaw to the survivor tree.
And this is an old elm tree growing in asphalt and had been burnt, had been blown up. And so I asked our team leader, said, what do you want to do about that big piece of metal? And he said, go whatever you got to do. When I was almost into the tree, and the team leader says, no, they're going to leave it for the memorial. Well, 2 or 3 days in, we're not thinking memorial, we're thinking somebody's going to jail.
The survivor tree now growing strong on the memorial grounds. Hundreds gather under it every year to reflect on the bombing and just how far we've come since then.
Think of Oklahoma City sometime as a tale of 2 trees. That one, who proved that you're tough and strong and endure, and a dogwood that Hillary and I planted on the south lawn of the White House on my way down here that fateful day 20 years ago.
Every year on the day of the bombing, a memorial is held on grounds where the Murrah building once stood. In 1995, after the bombing, then Oklahoma City Mayor Ron Norick appointed a 350-member task force to come up with ways to remember the event and to honor the lives lost. In 2000, on the 5th anniversary, the National Memorial was dedicated. Less than a year later, President George W. Bush dedicated the Memorial Museum on President's Day. Inside the museum, you'll find stories of those who were killed, those who survived, and those whose lives were changed forever. The museum and memorial and the yearly ceremony all there to honor those people and to help a new generation learn about what happened.
The public needs to know what happened. We need to be proud here in Oklahoma of what we did and be willing to stand up for it.
This year's memorial ceremony will be unlike anything the memorial has ever done. Because of the coronavirus, there won't be a public ceremony. Instead, the memorial is producing an hour-long ceremony that includes the 168 seconds of silence and reading of the names. That will air right here on Fox 25. That ceremony begins at 9 a.m. this Sunday. Every year at the memorial, speakers include local leaders. Frank Keating was elected Oklahoma's governor just 3 months before the attack and immediately had to lead our state through crisis. Not just him, but also his wife, Kathy.
I can call up tears just like that. Because it's just, those wounds I don't think will ever go away.
A pivotal moment for Governor and Mrs. Keating came just before dawn, the morning after the bombing. Frank Keating thanked a firefighter who was leaving his shift and introduced himself as the governor.
And he took his finger and he punched it in my chest. And he said, well, then you find out who did this, because all I pulled from that rubble were a child's finger and an American flag. And he walked on up the street. He was completely freaked out. You know, he was in shock. So we knew from that moment forward, we had to be assuring and reassuring, have all of the best of everything for these rescue workers, firefighters, and thank them all the time. Thanks for being here. What can we do for you?
The Keating set the tone, and the entire community followed their lead, caring for those who were helping Oklahoma in her darkest hour.
From all the people who donated blood or water, every need that was was needed from the rescue workers, the FEMA workers, the police and fire people, the volunteers, every need. They say they needed their laundry done, the rescue workers who were visiting, and the next thing you knew, not only was their laundry done, it was folded, in many cases ironed, and put on their pillow along with mints and roses. That's the first time that had ever been done.
We have come here today for prayer and to begin a time of healing.
Mrs. Keating also took on the role of quickly organizing a prayer service that aired on national television 4 days after the bombing. Then President Bill Clinton expressed the nation's grief.
Let us not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
He really focused on doing everything we needed. It really was bipartisanship at its very best.
While others relied on the Keatings for support and guidance, they were relying on each other, a partnership in every sense.
I knew she was having a tough time. She knew I was having a tough time, and we had to stand there together because we had to be strong in front of the public. And because people were just shattered.
Were you able to fall apart behind closed doors?
Oh, yeah. I remember I went back to my office one time, and I had a little, like a chair that I could lean back in because I was really exhausted, and I just started crying. It just wrenches you, but we had to be strong because there were a lot of things that had to be done.
Like deciding what to do with donations flooding into Oklahoma from all around the world to help families and survivors.
It was enough to help people, but it wasn't enough to help everyone in the same way. So I made a battlefield decision. If you lost your children, we would provide you counseling and we would bury the children. If your children lost you, we would put the kids through college anywhere they wanted to go.
No expenses.
At one time, we had 130 children in college.
The generosity of others ultimately invested in Oklahoma's future. After 9/11, leaders took a cue from Oklahoma City, our response, and our memorial.
We built our memorial on the heels of the tragedy, and we showed them how to bring the family members in and the victims in and give them the best and strongest voice.
Now, 25 years later, the Keatings continue to pledge to never forget or forgive the evil, but also never fail to embrace the good. It's a story worth sharing over and over again.
We tell it with heart and soul and love and kindness and hoping for a better tomorrow.
Oklahoma City showed itself to be a glorious place. The people, enormous courage, not one act of looting, total selflessness, sharing and caring, very spiritual, quite a day for Oklahoma City's goodness.
Last week, Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt reignited a mission. He asked everyone to commit to the Oklahoma standard. It's a challenge to invoke the kindness and goodness that shines so brightly through the darkness on April 19, 1995. And it's that Oklahoma standard that is still going so strong today.
How many people work there?
No idea.
The second floor is where the child care center is.
Seconds after the bombing, Oklahoma came together.
I think that this state is wired to be able to deal with things like that. I think the people here, whether it's tornadoes, ice storms, or a disaster like that, I just think that there's a mindset and a mentality and a spirit that, and we saw it in the weeks after that.
People rushed in to help in any way they could.
So I just started grabbing people, and a car would come by on Broadway. I'd stop the car, open the doors, throw about 2 or 3 people in each car, and I'd yell at the driver, take them to the hospital. These were just citizens that would stop, and I would put people in their cars and tell them to go. And without hesitation, no questions, they would take off.
They came from around the state. People were showing up in, work trucks, and how can we help?
The guy I was working with, he bored a hole in his boots, and they asked him what size shoe did he need. And within 5 minutes, they brought him a pair of boots.
You're in the middle of things, and it's still so unorganized, and you're trying to help and do what you can, and people are just the citizens of Oklahoma City are just unbelievable in the state.
The response to the bombing, not just limited to first responders.
It wasn't just the 3 of us, that there was hundreds and hundreds of police officers, firefighters, paramedics, regular citizens that showed up that day that all played every bit as big a role, if not bigger.
25 years later, the Oklahoma standard is still here, but it's up to those who experienced it in 1995 to pass it on and find a way to make it relevant for younger generations.
And I think it's our responsibility to talk. Mark and I have at our children's school to pass this on, pass the information, to pass our stories.
A new generation of young people have moved to Oklahoma since 1995. It's up to all of us to show them how even the most tragic event can bring out the best in people. And that spirit can exist in them too, especially now in the midst of a pivotal point in Oklahoma and U.S. history.
We know how to do it. We come together, collaborate, help each other. And I think if we will do that now through this situation, we're going to get through it.
The story of courage and heroism and excellence and competency, that Oklahoma standard transformed Oklahoma City. This city today is not what it was a year before the bombing in any manner, way, shape, or form. And that's a source of pride, that out of evil, good can come. And we've had a lot of good here in Oklahoma City since that tragedy.
25 years later, a city and state forever changed, but the Oklahoma standard and how we respond to tragedy, still the same.
Thank you for joining us tonight for this look back. And don't forget to tune in Sunday morning at 9 for the National Memorial's 25th anniversary ceremony.